Welcome, everyone, to the 23rd Annual Library of Congress Book Festival, a place where everyone has a story. At this time, we ask that you turn off or silence your phones. Behind you, over your left shoulder, are the restrooms, if that is important to you at this time. We also want to notify you that this will be a recorded event, and so your entry and presence at this program constitutes your consent to being filmed or otherwise recorded. Did you know that the Library of Congress has one of the largest publicly accessible comic book collections in the world? Mike Queen, reference librarian from our Serials and Government Publications Division, is here to show you some highlights from the comic book collection and to share your vast interest in comics. Thank you all for being here today and for sharing your interest in comics and books, and I will hand it over to Mike.
Thank you. I'm going to stand over here on the side so you guys can see the screen, because that's where all the comics are going to be. I'm Mike. I'm one of the reference librarians and comic book specialists at the Library of Congress, and we have over 160,000 comic books, most of them original, including this one, Green Lantern, Volume 2, number 87, featuring the first appearance of John Stewart as the Green Lantern. And of course, Hal Jordan's there too. I will take questions at the end. So, over 160,000 original issues. That means from 1930s to the present. Of those, there's 12,000 original titles. So I will do a brief overview of the comics, kind of in chronological order, and then I'll tell you about the other types of comics that we have as well. But no, this is a very small, tiny sample of what we have. But you're welcome to look at all of these comics in real life at the library, in the newspaper and current periodical reading room. And all that information will be on the last slide. And our booth is over there right across the way for the rest of our collection. So this here is the first appearance of Barbara Gordon in Detective Comics number 359, Batgirl from 1967. All right, early comics. Now, the years are rough, right? Not exact, so bear with me. Famous Funnies is probably considered the first comic book. Basically, it was the Sunday Funnies packaged in a comic book and sold for 10 cents. And that was published in 1934. Jumbo Comics is another title, and it came out a few years later in 1938 and features a couple strips from some artists you might know. Peter Pup, done by Bob Kane, who did Batman, and Will Eisner, who's considered the father of the modern comic book, and the Eisner Award, which is the Oscars for the comic book industry, is named after him. Then we have the golden age of comics. As many of you probably know, that started with Action Comics number 1 and the introduction of Superman. And before anybody asks, no, unfortunately we do not have Action Comics number 1. We do have lots of other Action Comics though. But we do have Superman number 1, which some of you may have remembered earlier this year. Representative Garcia used it at his swearing-in ceremony at the House of Representatives. He used our copy, the one you see there. All the comics today I have scanned from our collection, so these are not off the internet. So Superman number 1 came out in 1939. It was drawn by and written by Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel, same people did Action Comics number 1. Sensation Comics was the first cover appearance of Wonder Woman in 1942. And it was written by William Moulton Marston, who thought, well, there's just too much testosterone-heavy comics, superhero comics out there today. Let's bring a woman superhero in. So he invented Wonder Woman. And then we have Captain America that came out in March of 1941. Most comics creators in the comic book industry back then in the golden age were Jewish immigrants, and they had their families back in Europe, and they really wanted the U.S. to enter the war. So this was one way to encourage the U.S. to enter the war. This is a very early appearance of Hitler on the cover of the comic book as well, written by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. After the war, superhero comics popularity took a dive. So other comics came into popularity, and one of those types was horror comics. Eerie Comics number 1 in 1947 is considered the very first horror comic. It's a one-shot. Only one issue was published. Warren Publishing a few years later created a series by the same name. And then we have Tales from the Crypt. Those of you who watch Tales from the Crypt, the television show, it is based on the comic book by Entertaining Comics, EC Comics. And you'll recognize in the round inset photo there at the top is the Crypt Keeper, who is not a skeleton, but just a creepy looking dude who narrates Tales from the Crypt. There's a lot of humor in these horror comics, but there's also a lot of blood and gore. But they're always, the bad guy gets it in the end. And then we have more modern horror comic, which is The Walking Dead, which some of you may be familiar with the show. The comic came out in 2003, and it was published by Image Comics. Image was an imprint of a bunch of Todd McFarlane, who did Spawn, and a few others from Marvel and DC. They wanted creative rights to their comics because Marvel and DC, they own the characters. The creator doesn't own the character. So they started their own company, Image Comics. Other types of comics, in answer to all the violent comics on the stands, parents wanted something a little bit better for their kids to read. So the comics industry came out with these educational comics. And the first one was probably True Comics, which was published by the Parents Institute. It's the one in the middle that has the story of Jim Thorpe. And Parents Institute also publishes Parents Magazine. And so they decided, well, why don't we have comics about real life people, sports stars, historical events, historical figures, and put them in a comic book. So it worked. So DC got on the bandwagon with Real Fact Comics. True stories from the drama of life. This is from issue number 4, which features Jimmy Stewart, who is an ace World War II pilot, as well as an actor in It's a Wonderful Life. It also has a story about Jack London, the author of Call of the Wild and White Fang. And then on the right here, we have Treasure Chest of Fun and Fact. These comic books were distributed to Catholic grade schools in the 40s through 1972. And they also feature similar stories. This one is the story of Tommy Harmon, who was the Heisman Trophy winner in 1940 at the University of Michigan. And for you NCIS fans, he is the father of the actor Mark Harmon. Romance comics, another type. Got to get girls to read comics. So the primarily dominantly white male comic book industry thought, oh, we'll just have romance comics because that's what girls want to read. Not sure. But on the far left is Negro Romance, which was the only black romance comic in the Golden Age to positively portray black people in comic books. It was written by Roy Alden, who's white, but it was drawn by Alan Hollingsworth, who's black. And there were only 3 issues in the run, with a 4th reprint in 1955. And the Library of Congress is the only library to have the full run of this comic book. Romance, these Heartthrobs, 3 Girls, Their Lives, Their Loves, was edited by Barbara Freelander in the 1960s. She was the DC Comics editor for all romance comics at DC Comics. There weren't very many female editors back in the 60s. And these comics had beauty and fashion tips in them. And the artist was Tony Abruzzo, who was also a fashion designer before he was a comic book writer. So he probably had some input here on these, for example, Argyle fashions of the 60s. And then we have war comics were very popular from World War II onwards. And Wings Comics is unique because many of the stories, including Jane Martin Warner's, she's a nurse with a cape, but she doesn't have any superpowers. They were drawn by women comic book artists, Lily Renee and then Ruth Atkinson. Lily Renee is probably the women equivalent of Will Eisner. She's that big a deal in the comic book as a pioneer. And then on the right, we have another Jack Kirby Stanley creation, Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos. That's Nick Fury, before he was a member of an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And his Howling Commandos, and this was published in 1963, and he's serving in World War II. And I lost my place for some reason. Anyway, Then we have, in 1956, superheroes come back. And that was with the introduction of The Flash in 1956 in DC Showcase. DC Showcase was an anthology series that DC used to test out new characters. So they thought, well, why don't we bring back superheroes? So they chose The Flash. And they reintroduced The Flash as Barry Allen. And they very nicely paid homage, and you can see in the very first panel that Barry Allen, who's a police CSI, is reading Flash comics, which is the original featuring Jay Garrick as the Flash back in the 1940s. And then there's part of his origin story. And from then on, superheroes have been with us ever since. And over here is the first appearance of Iron Man in Tales of Suspense number 39 from 1963. In this case, he was captured in Vietnam, not Afghanistan, like in the movie. And then over here, we have Tales of Suspense number 48 with his familiar gold and red armor, which was designed and drawn by Steve Ditko. Iron Man is another Jack Kirby and Stan Lee creation. And then we have Underground Comics, which came out about mid-60s, ended about mid-70s. And these are comic book creators that thought that mainstream comics were just too formulaic. So they're like, well, why don't we just self-publish our own comics? So they did. So one is Women's Comics, which was created by a group of women comic book artists, founded by Eileen Kaminsky Crumb, and her husband is the comic book artist Robert Crumb. He actually drew a lot of the women's comics. And I chose this one because this one's funny, and it says, there's George Washington speaking to Betsy Ross, asking, can you have this flag ready by next week? And she's pissed off because it says, Betsy Ross had been planning to lead the troops up Bunker Hill. And then we have on the right, American Splendor, written by Harvey Pekar. And it's autobiographical about his life in Cleveland, Ohio. And this one's from 1977. And many underground comics, the covers were in color, but the content and stories inside were black and white, kind of like Mad Magazine. And now we get to independent comics, which is basically the modern version of underground comics. It's not really underground anymore. But you guys are probably familiar with San Diego Comic-Con and New York Comic-Con, right? That's usually caters to the mainstream comic book industry. Well, SPX, the Small Press Expo, caters to the independent comic books industry, who are also mostly self-published or small publishing companies. And they have a convention here in Bethesda, Maryland, every September. And the next one is September 9th and 10th. And it's called SPX, Small Press Expo. And their convention is on September 9th and 10th in Bethesda, Maryland. All you got to do is get off at the Bethesda Metro Station on the Red Line. And we get a lot of our comics from them. We have a very big SPX independent comic book collection at the library. And these are some examples. Love and Rockets from the 80s. It's a Mexican Chicano punk comic written by Gilbert and Jaime Hernandez, two brothers from California. And then we have, this is Taiwanese cuisine map. This is an example that not all comic books have to come in a traditional format. This is one sheet of paper with a comic on both sides. And it's in the shape of the country of Taiwan with cuisines from the various regions. And then we have, now we get to just different types of comics. Mini comics is kind of a subgenre of independent comics. That just means they're smaller than your average comic. Smile is also autobiographical, like American Splendor, and is about Raina's childhood, her dental woes when she fell and knocked out her two front teeth. She wrote a whole series. That comic book's probably the size of a passport, both of these. And Tamete Bako is an origami comic, and Tamete Bako means treasure box. It actually can be folded to look like that treasure box. And no, I did not fold that. That I got off the internet. I'm not that good. I can read them. I can't fold them like that. And then we have diversity in comics. So we have this Milestone, static from Milestone Media. Again, this is similar to Image Comics. Dwayne McDuffie and a group of black comic book creators thought black superheroes are being underrepresented and maybe poorly represented as well in mainstream comics. So they founded their own company, Milestone Media, and created their own superheroes, black superheroes like Static. Static is a high school kid, just like kind of like Spider-Man. So he's got all the high school problems, but he happens to be a superhero. And his superpowers are a combination of Magneto, who's got the magnetism stuff so he can levitate and fly, and Electro, who can fire electric bolts out of his hands. But he has all the high school problems of Spider-Man. It's a very funny comic, and he also always wears a different hat every issue. Also, we have LGBTQ comics, or comics that feature LGBTQ plus characters. And this is from Astonishing X-Men. It's the wedding of the mutant North Star. North Star was the first openly gay Marvel comic character. And North Star was a mutant with the Alpha Flight team, the Canadian version of X-Men. And you can see some of Alpha Flight behind him, Sasquatch and Vindicator, also known as Guardian. So that's Astonishing X-Men number 51 from 2012. We also have a growing collection of foreign comics. So we have Rama, which is from India, and it's the retelling of the folktale of mythology of the god, Hindu god Rama. And then on the right, we have Zana, which is a South African comic book, which is dystopian, which imagines what it would have been like if apartheid had never ended in South Africa. And I chose this one because I lived in South Africa during apartheid, so this one was close to home for me. And then we have cartoon comics, which is comic books that are used to promote animated cartoons. So we have Walt Disney, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, Woody Woodpecker, and Tom and Jerry. These just happen to be a back-to-school theme. One of my colleagues actually chose these ones. And then comics on screen. I had to have my Barbieheimer moment. This was the best I could get. So we have Barbie fashion from 1991. You can even design outfits for your Barbie doll. And then we have the Atomic Bomb, the story of the time, from Real Life Comics, one of those educational comics, right? Also, Blue Beetle, Jaime Reyes. I believe that Blue Beetle movie comes out this week, right? So that's the first comic cover appearance of the Blue Beetle. And Jaime Reyes was a teenager from El Paso. He finds this scarab, alien scarab. Long story short, he falls asleep. Scarab burrows into his spine and then fuses, and he wakes up and is able to transform into the Blue Beetle with armor, kind of like Iron Man's armor. And then we have Secret Invasion, which is currently a streaming television show starring Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury. And in addition to comic books, we have original comic art. Now, the original comic art you can find in the Prints and Photographs division at the Library of Congress. Same building, different floor. And then on the right, the left is Steve Ditko's original art from Amazing Fantasy number 15, which is in Prints and Photographs. On the right is the original Amazing Fantasy number 15 from 1962, which is in our collection in the reading room. More original art. This is R.F. Outcult's application for copyright to copyright The Yellow Kid, which is considered the oldest newspaper comic strip in the United States. And that's from 1896. That's the original. And then on the right, you have Peanuts, Charles Schulz's Peanuts from 1952. Let's see here. We also have webcomics, a huge webcomics archive. So this is just two examples. Gronk, which is about a monster that runs away from Monsterland to live with the humans. This woman and her dog and her cat. And then we have Dinosaur Comics by Ryan North, which is just about a funny strip about talking dinosaurs. And in addition, we occasionally have exhibits of our collection of comic art. This was from 2019 and 2020. And you could go to this website and check out the collection. We also had a Jeppy's Gems collection, which we exhibited in 2021 and 2022, which you can also look at online. And all of these comic books are in our collection. And that is it. You can find all of our comic books in Madison Building Room LM133. That is on the first floor, the same level as the entrance level to the building. You can always ask us about comics. You can request them in advance by using the Ask a Librarian feature, or you can call us. We also have blogs, Headlines and Heroes, so you can read about some of our comics in our collection and other things in our collection. And on the right here is a look at our comic books vault. All of our comics are stored in these boxes in a temperature-controlled vault, which stays at about 65 degrees. So it stays quite chilly in there. And then these are the sleeves and boxes that we put the comics in. So yes, if we receive a comic that is slabbed, that means it comes in a slab. For those of you who collect comics, that slab gets cracked and it gets put in an archive sleeve so that all of you can visit us to read them. We want you to come in and read our comics. So please come in and read them. Thank you very much. And I will take questions now. Yes. Oh, we have comics right up to last year. We get, also I should mention, there's 3 ways to get our comics. 1, we get them through copyright. So anytime Marvel, DC, or some other comic book company publishes a comic, we get it through copyright. We get 2 copies. The other way is we buy them. So if we have a gap in our collection or we didn't get it through copyright in time, where you can buy it. And then occasionally we get a donation of comics. So yeah, we have recent comics all the way up to the present day. Yes. The web comics are online. Most of the modern comics, they're available online, but you have to pay a fee. Like Marvel Unlimited has their comics online. DC Universe Infinite has theirs online. Now, you can read Golden Age comics online at a site called Comic Books Plus, and there's another website called Digital Comic Museum, and they have all kinds of Golden Age comics online, full text and full color. Anyone else? Yes.
Oh, okay. Does the library only collect serialized comics or any graphic novels?
We have graphic novels. The graphic novels are actually stored, they're held by the general collection because they're bound. So the graphic collection novels are actually in our general collection. But you can look them up in the catalog just like the comic books. But you wouldn't request them in our reading room, you request them in the main reading room. But yeah, we have graphic novels, we have omnibuses, we've got it all. It's just a question of where you request it. We keep the actual serial version, so say The Dark Knight Returns, right? There's an omnibus, so you can get it from general collection, but we actually have the individual issues from Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller.
Yes.
Yes.
How do you get a job with the Library of Congress
You
or
apply,
volunteer?
you can get a job by applying through USA Jobs and hope for the best. And a volunteer, I think there's a volunteer office actually that you can visit to volunteer for programs. There's a whole docent program where you can volunteer and show people around. But I would ask one of these other people here, they would know, or at the information booth over here, they might know who you should talk to about that. Yes.
What's your favorite series?
My favorite series is probably X-Men or Spider-Man. I like the old 60s X-Men. I also like, I'm very partial to the Chris Claremont X-Men series, all different, all new X-Men, the Phoenix Saga, that era, 80s, 70s, 80s. My favorite independent comic, that's a good question. I don't know if I have a favorite independent comic. I do like Powerpuff Girls because my friend wrote it, and his wife works for the Library of Congress. If you use the Ask a Librarian feature, you can just email us and ask, to let us know that you have a donation. You can send us an inventory of what you have, and then we'll contact you about next steps, how to send it to us, and so on. Very rarely do we reject, especially if it's comics, we're probably not going to reject it. There's unlikely, because we can always add it to our collection. Yeah, graphic novels too. Oh, sorry about that. Didn't mean to grab the bottom there. Oh, okay.
So, you said you crack slabs when you get them, and you showed us some rare comics like Superman #1.
Yeah.
Are we actually allowed to go in and handle Superman #1?
You can come in and handle Superman #1 with one of us. So as long as we're with you, you can look at Superman #1. That's fine. It's not a problem. There are some that are so fragile that we cannot serve. An example is All-Star Comics #8, which is the first appearance of Wonder Woman. That one is so falling apart that even I won't handle that one. And for those, we have them on color microfiche, so you can still look at it. Hi.
Do you have Warrior Cat graphic novels?
Do we have which graphic novel?
Warrior Cat graphic novels.
We probably do. I'd have to look it up. But if you look it up in the catalog and it's in there, then we have it.
I'm sorry, I came in the middle of the donation information. Could you tell me about donations?
If you use the Ask a Librarian feature, just email us what you would like to donate. You can attach an inventory list, and then we will get back to you with the details. Yep.
Are there other questions?
Hi, I'm just curious to know if you have had any, like, in the last several years, we've seen an uptick in, like, the movies based on comics.
Yeah.
Has that, have you seen an uptick also in interest in comics, in people coming in searching for them? as a
Yeah,
result of
there's
that?
been people coming in to do comic book research, researching graphic novels, or the history of comics. We've had a lot more people come in. Anyone else? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate you guys coming out. Thanks.